A bit of an ad for this before I start. I do some work with some a psychology co-op in Sydney. We've just moved to Sydney from Perth. Had to get a passport, learn a new language and all that. And called Callisto Workplace Health, and they are doing a lot of work for the opposite of the end of where you are at. The people who are coming in for 5 years to teach, fresh out of university, and quitting. And how do you get your retention? And there's lots of ways of doing that, but they do a lot of good work in that area. So there's just a QR code on it if you want to have a look at that, and there's some paperwork there. That's basically not what I'm going to be speaking about today. I do want to speak, when I was given the title A Better Story, I like to play on words, and I thought, how about a battered story? How about a battered story? I wanted to talk a little bit about how we're coming up for air. It feels like we've gone a few rounds with the secular culture. We've got a bit of a smack in the face. There's legislation coming out that's pushing hard against certain aspects of what it means to be human that are tied to being Christian. I wrote a book called Being the Bad Guys, shameless plug. 4 years ago, it seemed like it was the zeitgeist, that this is what it's going to be like for ages, folks. So buckle up, sit down, take your cod liver oil and cope with it, because it feels like it's going to be a lot harder to be a Christian in the West, particularly over the next 20, 30 years. Now it might, but one of the things we had was a slight narrative of decline, personified for me by Notre Dame's burning in 2019. And this was said in a journal from France. The fire of April 15 confronts us with this intolerable fait accompli. I love the way the French take our language. There is no eternity. There is no eternity. Big call, eh? But when you see the fall of the spire on the top of the Notre Dame, it was kind of symbolic. It's one last, swing of the fist, and you knock to the ropes, and it's going down. It's going down. And across the pond there in England, there was the bus campaign that was promoted by Richard Dawkins. Buses didn't come forever, then you get two in a row and they all look like this. There's probably no God. A little bit of humility there, epistemological humility. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life. Scold, 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 Stop worrying and enjoy your life. And Richard Dawkins said, we are all atheists about most of the gods that humanity has ever believed in. Some of us just go one God further. And, the average person who hasn't read about the deep difference of who Jesus was in the Roman Empire and how the Christian worldview just changed the whole world of the gods, would look at that and go, yeah, he's right, let's just get rid of Jesus. There's probably no God. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life. Grow up, England. Mature. Put it behind you. And here in Australia, in the 2016 census, not religious anymore, marked no religion on the 2016 census. And 900,000 extra people did. I love that line, not religious anymore, because not religious is a slogan, but not religious anymore, well, we've talked about it, it's a story. It could be a better story. Do you remember that time you were religious and you had to sit in itchy pants with a tight shirt listening to someone banging on about something? Well, you don't have to do that anymore, and you can still be a good Australian. Our story changed. 900,000 people. And it wasn't you. It wasn't, Sunday you'd been teaching kids' church and some kid had kicked you in the shins and their mother didn't really disapprove of that, and you thought, I'm done with Christianity tomorrow, I'm ticking no on the census tomorrow night. That was the domain of pastors generally who felt that way. It was just nominalism. Thin belief. And in 2021 another 900,000, 1.8 million people over the course of the two censuses, or censi, whatever you call them. But in 2011, which is the first census we had online, Madge would be sitting in the kitchen, at the table, filling it in, and Harold would be watching TV, and she'd go, "Hey, Harold, Harold!" And he'd go, Wah! Because 90% of marriage at that age is just shouting what to another room, right? And what religion are we? Californian. And she'd mark Californian, but they didn't go to the Californian church, and it just wasn't. The kids weren't married there; they just lived, and then they're not going to get buried by the Californians, and it's just the way it is. And religion was going to quietly fold its wings in the West. Just get on and enjoy your life. At the same time, as we know in Australia, that some of the legislative air cover for some of the major issues around ethics that you wish to hold on to as a Christian school, the fruit of the gospel in a human life, are being challenged in courts, in parliaments, things like that. And then we think, what's 2026 census going to be like in Australia? Because it's next year. Will it be another 900,000? As spirituality closes its doors. Seen though, in this interesting turn that I didn't predict and that seems to have come out of the blue is, as the term, the sea of faith. The tide is coming back in a little bit. My friends who are pastors say that's what they see. People coming in cold to Christianity after watching, 50 YouTube videos about it. After not engaging with the church's amazing evangelistic program, coming in cold. Well, speaking of the Sea of Faith, this is Matthew Arnold, his famous poem, Dover Beach, is where he talks about the Sea of Faith. And he says this. This is in the 1800s, second stanza of Dover Beach. The sea of faith was once too at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy, long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. Its melancholy, long withdrawing roar. And as Christians in the West, we have bought into that framework, that we're just fiddling around the edges as it just keeps retreating. And we'll hold on. It's a melancholy, long withdrawing roar. And the world is going to be much more sensible. Stop worrying. There's probably no God. Enjoy your life. Next minute, anxiety levels through the roof, right? That's the issue. And maybe you've listened to or watched Justin Brearley, Is the Tide Turning? Gen Z and the Asprey Awakening from a few years ago. Some interesting articles on that by secular young people who ended up at it looking for something. Because white goods and a new phone and Tinder just wasn't cutting it. When the Queen died, there was a magnificent transcendent moment that I think her funeral was like thumbing her nose at the great and good of the secular. And President Macron was on front row to see the most transcendent funeral we've had in public life for a long time. And I wrote at the time, for one brief day, perhaps one final day, transcendence was admitted into the public square in the modern Western world. You see, our problem isn't that people aren't allowed to believe things in their private opinions. Our problem is that we've hollowed out anything as real. We've said, what you live in is an impervious, invisible dome over the material world, and nothing goes in and nothing comes out. Charles Taylor's understanding of the immanent frame, as he calls it. And that's reality. And this isn't. This is opinion. And the Queen said, no. And I wrote 4 or 5 years ago, well, when she died a few years ago, maybe it's over. But what are people looking for in our culture at the moment? They're looking for something transcendent. They are coming to your schools. Suddenly you don't have to mutter under your breath about how you believe in transcendent things anymore. They go, well, my neighbour is weirder than you anyway, so it doesn't matter. She's into, whatever. And what you're getting, and we'll discuss this in a minute, is this funny hybrid of hyper-modernity with people believing exceptionally pagan, superstitious things. A mash-up. My friend said he was on the bus into the city in Sydney and everyone was talking about the only topic that anyone ever seems to talk about in Sydney is that's the price of houses. And the next minute they're talking about the psychic tarot reading they're going to on the weekend. Suited young men. Put those two worldviews together. Didn't see that coming. Perhaps we did see this coming. Here's what else the census data showed. 40% of 16 to 24-year-old Australians, 1.1 million people, reported having a mental disorder in 2020-21. Now, granted, our younger cohort had the language of mental disorder imprinted, with a sheet given to them at birth to go home with. My wife is a clinical psychologist. We understand the language. But that's double the number of the Gen Pop. In Australia, I read that again, it doesn't say 40% of 16 to 24-year-olds in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It says Australia. There's something wrong. And we can't articulate it. We don't know what to say. And the thing about Australia, of course, is most Australians are not antagonistic towards Christianity. They just don't care. They just don't care. I prefer a bit of antagonism, don't you? At least it's a pushback rather than the blancmange of not caring that you could not nail to the wall for 30 or 40 years from about 1955. But it struck me, this is in Perth. There are some nice places in Perth, but you don't have to go there because there's better places on the East Coast. But this is the poor man's, surfers paradise, right? This is Mindarie Keys. It's about 40 k's from the city. And one year for Christmas we get a staycation. Because in Perth when it's 45 degrees, everyone heads south, right? But we didn't. And we went to Mindarie Keys, and you see the rocks up there at the top. They've made the groin go out that way, and this beautiful marina, and it looks like Costa del Sol, all these boats, and down this end is, a microbrewery, restaurant. It's beautiful, but on this side of the water, on this side of the rocks, it's pretty dangerous. There's a sign on the beach that says, "Don't swim here; it's too dangerous." And the wind would howl every day, and the waves would crash every day, except, of course, in this calm bit where it was just calm all the time. And this is the back veranda view, but the front of the house we could barely go in the door without it being pushed in our face by the wind. And it was this little protected pleasure island. And one night, warm evening, Jill and I walked down to the restaurant and it was heaving with people, families, everyone laughing, and I just said to Jill, does anyone even think about Jesus in a place like this? No, because most of Australians are trying to carve out their own little Mindarie marina for as long as they can, to buffer them from the wind and waves of reality. And you don't need to think about Jesus. But here's the thing. Every now and then, in everyone's life, at some stage, a rogue wave or a strong wind will wash over their personally crafted Mindarie marina. And it's at that point that they might start to ask some questions. Death, disappointment, divorce, unforgiveness, brokenness, no sense of purpose. It's at that point that they might start to ask some questions that lead to Jesus. And I think that's what we're seeing in some cohorts across the West. And I think that's one of the inarticulate reasons that people send their kids to Christian schools, even if they're not Christian, and even if they say, make him a good person, but don't make him a missionary for Jesus somewhere. They want the fruit without the root. But C.S. Lewis said, God whispers in our pleasures, but shouts in our pain. Pain is God's megaphone to arouse a deaf world. Would you ever pray that Australia would go through more pain so that God's voice would be heard more clearly and people would respond to the gospel? We never pray that because it might mean my house price goes up or down or whatever. But meaning and purpose are massive issues in our culture, and there's a lack of them. See, we read a little bit about the melancholy, long, withdrawing roar of the sea of faith. The tide of faith has gone out. But Matthew Arnold was no slouch. This is what he goes on to say in the poem. Our love, let us be true to one another. For the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. Matthew Arnold realised that if the sea or the tide of faith went out, it would sweep the sea strand of all that was beautiful and good. And you would have to come up with it yourself. But even he didn't predict how far that would go. What's his opening line? Let us be true to who? One another. We don't believe that anymore. Who's the person you're supposed to be true to? Yourself. And if I have to be true to myself by breaking covenant with someone, I'm rewarded for that in this culture. That's the world we live in. And look, there are some great philosophers who talk about this. This is one of my favourites. Oh, how did that get in? No, that's meant to be there, right? Taylor Swift gave the commencement address at New York University in 2022. She was receiving an honorary doctorate for writing another song about one of her ex-boyfriends, I guess, but you know, who knows. And she gets up and you read it and it goes, wow, this is a very brittle vision of human flourishing at New York University to the safest, wealthiest, most educated people on the planet. And most of it says, keep your nose above the waterline. It's tough out there. And she says, how do I give advice to this many people about their life choices? I won't. Scary news is you're on your own now. Cool news is you're on your own now. That you do you. And when you screw it up, you've only got you to blame. Is it any wonder that 40% of 16 to 24-year-olds are suffering from mental illness? The weight and responsibility of you do you is crushing people. Reading the transcript was sobering, because I think in the year I was born, 1967, gee, I hate those dial things that just keep going back, you know, 67. If you gave that same commencement address at New York University to the smartest, the richest and the safest people on the planet, they would have run you out of town. They would have mocked you because it was reach for the stars. And 2 years later they did, where the average age of a NASA engineer was a mid-20s. 1969. Now mid-20s is failure to launch. Never mind getting something on the moon, right? And you see the atomised life with no centre. How can I tell you anything? How can I give you any advice about anything? You're on your own now. I can't give you advice. Great. The noble, the wealthy, the good of our culture can't give us anything to go by. But things are shifting, because I think you can only bottom out for so long. And I present to you, ladies and gentlemen, the gateway drug to Christianity for many young men at the moment. Jordan Peterson. He should be in commission, right? The Great Commission is actually $1 to him every time he, sends someone to your church who goes, I don't know much about anything, but I read Jordan Peterson's talk, and there's got to be... The amount of times I've heard that from pastors saying, someone came to us who'd read Jordan Peterson and says, what's next? Now, there's a bit of deconstruction to do there, because that's not the gospel. But it certainly points out that something is wrong culturally. So there are elite level people asking questions that we would never have thought would have been asked. And then there's people like A.N. Hersey Ali, married to Neil Ferguson, both great academics, intellects. She was a Muslim who became an atheist, who is Richard Dawkins' partner in crime on so many atheist debates. And when she wrote an article 2 years ago against the flow of the culture in the Atlantic called Why I Am Now a Christian. You go, there's a, reverse. And her reasons weren't because of Jesus. Her reasons were cultural to begin with. There's a better way to manage the challenges of existence than either Islam or unbelief had to offer. Something's missing, she said. There's probably no God, but I'm very worried. I'm not enjoying life, and lots of people aren't. Richard Dawkins was so worried, he wanted to have a debate with her. So they had a debate publicly. And he went there going, I came here to convince you that you aren't a Christian. But now I see you are a Christian, and Christianity is stupid. Yet even he has said he's a cultural Christian recently. But she started saying, look, the world looks crazy and there's something wrong with the world. But as she went to church each week, she said in the article she realised there was something wrong with her. And she's become a Christian because she said when the vicar started to talk, he made sense. And that's a miracle in itself, right? So, So you're getting this elite level thinking about Christianity at the same time as in the UK and across Australia, you're seeing young men in particular rocking up to churches. Parents signing up for Christian schools at a rate of knots. A lot of it, I think, is, as the late, great Tim Keller said, the modern self is exceptionally fragile. Yep. While having the freedom to define and validate oneself is superficially liberating, it is also exhausting. You and you alone must create and sustain your identity. This has contributed to unprecedented levels of depression and anxiety and never satisfied longings for affirmation. We have had 4 decades, 5 decades, 4 decades of everyone getting a trophy, everyone being affirmed. And how much affirmation is enough? Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. So I think we're going to start to see a turn. He wrote that in his last article for also The Atlantic before he died. And it was called Why American Christianity is Due for a Revival, or for the tide to turn. Because he said, Christianity does not go from strength to strength, but from death to resurrection. People don't become Christian until they do. That's the thing. That's the way it is. Dead people are brought to life. Blind people are made to see. Deaf ears are unstopped. That's the gospel. It's the way it works. I'll tell you, look, our church in Perth is a network of 3 churches, one that I'd pastored and planted, and by the time there's 3 churches, it's a good-sized network, because when there's 2 of you, you're only one church split away from going back to one church. You're not a network anymore, right? But we've got 3, and there's about 900 people, and they all turn up in September, in spring, when the time the Kings go to war. We have a big get-together with 3 churches at Swan Christian College, which is where our church used to meet. And it's fantastic. The A-list preacher preaches the sermon for all 3. I never got asked. I must have been away on those weekends. I can't recall. The best musicians, but it's just great. Communion together. And then there's a big party on the lawn with lots of everyone setting up and selling, exchanging money and doves. And no, that's a different story. Hang on. No, it's just fun, right? And my friend Ollie, who is the head of Westfield's shop fit-out design, so around Australia, creative industries. He says, he doesn't go to the same church I went to. He went to one of the other 3. He said, I want you to meet someone who works with me. This is Claire. She's just become a Christian about a month ago. I went, no. And I looked at her, and I put on my Arnie Terminator 2 glasses like Arnie does in the bar when he wants a leather jacket, I want your motorbike, scanning the room. And I'm looking at her and I'm going, you work with Ollie and you're about 40, you're a white, Western, well-educated woman who's in the creative industries. And I said this to her, people like you don't become Christian. How did that happen? She said, look, during COVID, everyone was losing their head or their job, and Ollie wasn't, and there was something about him. Mm-hmm. So I asked. He said, he's a Christian. She said, all right. Hey, could I read the Bible? He gave her a Bible. She started reading the Bible. And then she said, could I come to church with your family? And he said, yeah, you can come to church. And I said, and then what happened? Because I'm waiting for, I heard about Jesus in a sermon and I became a Christian. I was, no way, that doesn't happen. Not to 40, I understand if a 18 to 19-year-old Chinese national student comes to Australia and is walking through campus one day and suddenly is mugged and finds themselves eating pizza and reading Mark's Gospel. That's how you become a Christian in Australia. But white, Western, well-educated women who are 40 in creative industries don't. Until they do. Because that's the way the gospel works. And I said to her, because she's a newbie, how's it feel? And she said it feels light, like some sort of burden rolled off me. There's a Sankey's revivalist hymn from the 50s we used to sing with that in it. It's a cliche. It's like this woman, I said, I used to be a journalist, as you heard. So I was a great journalistic second question, follow-up to Sucker Puncher. How else does it feel? Because I couldn't think of anything else to say. And she said, it feels like I don't need the approval of anyone else anymore if Jesus approves of me now. Yeah? Because Claire, her name, didn't become a Christian till she did. And I think I want to encourage us that this tide of faith, that's how it'll work. No, it's not going to be the low-hanging fruit all the time. If you think it is, maybe God's saying, get a bigger ladder and get up to the top of the tree. Now let me just temper. I love tides of faith stories. I love tides coming in. What about tsunamis? Very famous picture from the Bali, sort of the whole South Asian Pacific, or South Asian tsunami. This is a mother going into the water to say to her family, get out, it's not a wave. They all survived, so I've got a photo up there. Because when you clear the decks, when you clear the strand of all that is good and true and right, as Matthew Arnold said, you leave things open for a lot of crazy stuff. Maybe we won't see an orderly return to the 1950s kind of Christianity framework that we had. Maybe we will see a crazy, strange tsunami of crazy spiritual ideas, of superstitions, of all sorts of things we have to combat that are in your school. The world will come to your school and it will look like a tsunami, because what makes tsunamis dangerous isn't just the water, it's the flotsam and jetsam that they carry along. It's why people sit on a bus talking about house prices and then say, let's go down to the tarot reading after work. And Mark McCrindle asked the question, are we post-Christian or are we post-secular? It feels like all bets are off in the spiritual world in some places across the West at the moment. People will become Christian, but the dark satanic forces will have their way on a beach that's been swept clean, where there are no guardrails to guide people away from things that are dark, where when power is the thing we want most, the devil is more than happy to offer that to us in exchange for something. Don't be surprised at the level of spiritual superstition you see in the next 20 years, rivaling, working alongside, tracking alongside the Christian faith in the West. Because didn't Jesus say this? When an impure spirit comes out of a person, it goes through arid places, seeking rest and does not find it. Then it says, I will return to the house I left. When it arrives, it finds the house unoccupied, swept clean and put in order. The Western world, the gospel comes in, and then we sweep it out. We don't want that. And then it goes and takes with it 7 other spirits more wicked than itself and goes and lives there. And the final condition of that person is worse than the first. The gospel came into our world and swept away superstition. You know that. You read Acts. You see that they weren't atheists, they were superstitious. And what we're seeing with the receding tide of Christianity is a house full of superstition in the West, at a time when we thought atheism was going to be the new thing. And it's not. Witch Talk, 31.2 billion views. Everyone's looking for some sort of transcendence, even if that transcendence is transhuman. In a world where we are gripped still with the fear of death, we are looking for ways to live forever. And we no longer think that a human being is worth anything in on of him or herself. Peter Thiel was interviewed by Ross Douthat from the New York Times. And Ross Douthat asked Peter Thiel, do you hope for a future on this planet that includes humans? And he couldn't answer it. He couldn't answer it. People's greatest hope is that somehow they will be uploaded into a disembodied experience in the cloud. That's a very thin eschatological hope. And we're in this crazy mess. Elsewhere, Ross Douthat, I can find where he is, Ross Douthat says this: the future of humanity depends on people opening doors to the transcendent rather than sealing themselves into materialism and despair. But when the door is open, be very, very careful about what you invite in. People don't have a rule book. A bit of this, bit of that, all sorts of crazy spiritualities. And they're coming to your school, those people, with their kids. And you get to offer them the thing that sweeps superstition away, the gospel. Be very, very careful about what you invite in. It used to be said that the devil's greatest trick, as it says in Kaiser Soze's Usual Suspects and elsewhere, the devil's greatest trick was to convince people that he didn't exist. But that's not his greatest trick in the rest of the world outside the West. His greatest trick is to convince people that he's more powerful. Ask any good, solid materialist Protestant missionary who spends even 2 years in sub-Saharan Africa whether they think the devil and his powers are real and show themselves. And I think we'll see that in the West in a post-Christian era. How do we respond? Well, I think the first thing is that we acknowledge that there's a world next door which is very different to the world we believe in. That craziness has come to town in all sorts of spiritual perspectives. The tsunami's hit. There's a great book called The World Next Door by Rory Shiner and Peter Orr. And they do a short guide to the Christian faith for people that have none of the furniture in their house about what Christianity is about. And they use the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. I believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit and born of the Virgin Mary. He suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended to hell. The third day he rose again from the dead. He ascended to the Creed, chapter by chapter. Well, chapter by chapter from chapter 2. Because this is how they start chapter 1. But first, demons. This is a good, Sydney Anglican church-going person here. Jesus was an exorcist. He once cast a legion of demons out of a man and into a herd of pigs. They ran off a cliff and into the ocean and were drowned. True story. Many Christian books addressed to modern scientifically inclined Westerners don't begin here. The average secular person is unprepared to take such stories seriously. But I propose we start exactly here. Consider it training at altitude. If you're still with us after the demon and pig story, the rest is going to feel pretty sane. Now, what are they saying there? They're saying we're living in a world which is so imminently framed, which has like this invisible dome around them, and there's probably no God, so stop worrying about it, that in order to shift people, you have to give them a reframing of the whole of reality. And evangelicals, by and large, have been very keen to show how sensible we are to the watching world by saying we admit to the resurrection, but everything else, we're not so sure. But this is saying, and you read the story of Jesus doing that, there's a heaven above, and there's a place of the dead below, and there's an earth in the middle, and things leak between them. And if you haven't got a framework that can see the world like that, it's very hard to convince people of the rest of the story, I think. But here's the good news. People believe really, really weird stuff today and still have jobs where they have to wear suits and ties. Not just patchouli oil and beads. Oh, this is Gold Coast. You do, right? But I don't think there's anything wrong with weirding it up as Christians a little bit. It can't be any weirder than what we've seen. We have to rebuild a whole way of looking at the world because the sea strand has been stripped of all that is good and true and right by this harsh materialist world. And people are coming to us going, if you've got something more than this reality, I'd be really happy with that. And you get the opportunity as schools to lean into it. And people will start to ask questions. And no one will become a Christian until they do. Until they do. I think that's what I want to encourage you with. So it does feel like it's been a boxing match, doesn't it? It feels like the last 10 years have been a bit of a slog. But I want to encourage you that the tide is coming back in, even if it looks like a tsunami. And it's the opportunity for us to really sort out what we believe and really lean into the strangeness of Christianity to people who are sick to the back teeth of the next date or the next iPhone or whatever it is that isn't doing it for them. I want to encourage you. The gospel is good news for those people in many situations. And none of them will become Christians until they do. Because that's the way God works. Thanks very much. We've got a few questions, if we can have a few questions. Thank you. Do we have time for questions, or are everyone cooked? Oh, sorry, I put that.